Senator from Utah.
Mr. President, first, I'd like to ask unanimous consent that Frederick L. Dressler, a National Security Fellow in the Office of Senator Ayotte, be granted privileges on the floor during consideration of S-2943, the National Defense Authorization Act.
Without objection.
Mr. President, what my distinguished colleagues from North Dakota and Indiana are proposing is to unleash the Export-Import Bank from the constraints under which it currently must operate, to begin authorizing transactions above $10 million. Between 2007 and 2014, 84% of the bank's subsidy and loan guarantee deals exceeded $10 million, 84%. And the vast majority of those were given to the wealthiest, most well-connected businesses in America that should have no problem at all obtaining financing in the open market. Mr. President, the Export-Import Bank represents so much of what the American people resent and despise about Washington, D.C. This is a Great Depression-era relic, one that lives on today, and it's grown into one of the most treasured relics for favoring banks. And it's a favored relic for well-heeled lobbyists, big government, and politically favored businesses. It's an 82-year-old case study in American corporate welfare. And for some reason, this Senate continues to support it. Ex-Im has managed to live through more than 30 corruption and fraud investigations into its system of doling out taxpayer-backed subsidies and loan guarantees to foreign buyers of U.S. exports. And in 2013, for half of the financing deals within the Export-Import Bank's portfolio, Ex-Im was either unable or unwilling to provide any justification whatsoever connected to its mission. Mr. President, that's $18.8 billion in estimated export value that apparently had no connection to Ex-Im's mission. Or if it did, Ex-Im didn't bother to offer that up. Many of Ex-Im's supporters claim that the bank's main function is to support small business. That sounds nice. But the problem with it is that this claim doesn't stand up to even a modest amount of scrutiny. Look at the institution's track record. Only 0.5% of all small businesses in America benefit from Ex-Im financing. 0.5%. And even that tiny figure may well be an overestimation, may well overstate the case, because Ex-Im uses such a broad definition of the term small business. Mr. President, confirming this nominee would allow Ex-Im to return to its old ways of approving massive financing deals for the largest corporations in coordination with the largest banks, all with the backing of American taxpayers. Permanently ending the Export-Import Bank would be a small but important and symbolic step toward restoring fairness to our economy and fairness to our government. It would prove to the American people that their elected representatives in Congress have the courage to eliminate one of the many federal programs that foster cozy relationships between political and economic insiders, providing a breeding ground for cronyism and for corruption. But so long as this Senate remains unwilling to close Ex-Im, we should at the very least make sure that it does not have the ability to further advance its cronyist agenda. Now, you want to talk about harming competitiveness? Let's talk about that. If we want to have that discussion, let's have that discussion now. You want to know what harms competitiveness in America, including and especially the kind of competitiveness that has tended to foster the development of the greatest economy the world has ever known? The kind of competitiveness that makes it possible, where it exists, for small businesses to make it onto the big stage? Let's look at federal regulations. Federal regulations are a big deal in this country. I remember being appalled 20 years ago to learn that the federal regulatory system was imposing some $300 billion a year in corporate compliance costs, regulatory compliance costs. Now, those regulatory compliance costs might be borne immediately, initially, by big corporations, by small corporations, mostly by businesses. But you know who pays for it, Mr. President? Hardworking Americans. In fact, some have described this effect as sort of a backdoor, invisible, and very regressive tax on the American people. So when I first learned of this problem, I started thinking of it this way. This is an additional $300 billion a year that the American people are paying essentially into the federal government because everything they buy, goods and services, become more expensive. They also pay for it in terms of diminished wages, unemployment, and underemployment. But they do pay for it. And they pay for it disproportionately at the middle and at the low end of the economic spectrum in America. Because unlike our actual tax system, our visible tax system, which is highly progressive, our backdoor invisible tax system, our regulatory system, is highly regressive. Some have estimated that this regulatory compliance cost, just complying with federal regulations, today costs the economy some $2 trillion a year, meaning that this is multiplied roughly sevenfold just in the last 20 years. Mr. President, if you don't think that is a significant impediment to competitiveness in America, I don't know what is. This is a problem. Some have estimated that each and every American household pays some $15,000 more each year for the goods that it purchases simply because of federal regulations. This, Mr. President, hurts competitiveness, and so do our high tax rates. These harm competitiveness, and so, Mr. President, I stand with the senior senator from Alabama, and I support him in his objection. Thank you, Mr. President.
Mr. President.
The senator from